The fact of the matter is that a lot of visual novels have a good soundtrack, but the best visual novels have tracks that are moment-defining, emotional, and memorable, adding impact to the reading experience. Tracks that you'll listen to years later that'll make you remember the emotional trauma you felt whilst reading the visual novel. I think BGMs are heavily underrated in visual novels, despite the fact they play one of the most important parts in how you feel whilst reading, and they aren't talked about enough. So today I want to tell you my top 10 most memorable tracks that are both a joy to listen to, as well as memory and nostalgia drivers of visual novels I once read and loved. I am going to limit the list to one BGM per series, but that's the only restriction, so here we go. And hey, if you want to see more visual novel content, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. It helps the channel a lot. The very first time you hear this soundtrack is on the title screen of Doki Doki Literature Club, and it's just a cute piano tune with a couple of melodies that are a joy to listen to. What Doki Doki Literature Club does to this theme though, throughout the entire visual novel, is transform it via the emotional scenes and various conflicts provided throughout the novel, and by the end it takes on an entirely different meaning from when you first heard it. Now, when you hear this theme, you'll immediately think of DDLC and the emotions it made you feel, such as how Monica is undeniably best girl. Whilst I am putting this at the 10th spot personally, this may very well be the most known, memorable theme in the entire medium of visual novels, known by almost anyone who has watched the various Let's Players who read DDLC over the years. Even my brother knows it and he thinks visual novels are cringe. The visual novel Love, Money, Rock and Roll might cost money and have subpar romance in its routes, but it definitely delivers on the rock and roll. I haven't talked about this visual novel yet, but it is easily one of the best soundtracks in any visual novel I have ever read, and from that, Heart Eater Strikes Again is my favorite. Because of the vastness of Love, Money, Rock and Roll's soundtrack, Heart Eater Strikes Again plays very few times, and only during parts of conflict between characters. Whilst conflict is definitely the theme of the song, and thus it makes sense, that's a damn shame, because I could listen to this on repeat for hours. And I pretty much have, because it's the only soundtrack song to ever hit the first most played on my Spotify repeat playlist. I love rock music, but I also love 80s sounding synths. So when you put the two together and add some aggression to it, you get an undeniable banger that is simply unforgettable. Steins Gate Zero has a lot of problems compared to the original Steins Gate. Being a popular series, you've probably already read it and know that, or watched the countless video essays on this topic. I'm not here to reiterate that. What I will say though is that Steins Gate Zero carries tones of depression, melancholy, hopelessness, which is permeated throughout the entire visual novel, with protagonist Okabe Rintaro at the center. Sure, you can certainly understand why he feels that way given the events of the first Steins Gate, but the plot really pushes you to shout, "Get your shit together, Okabe," until the very last moment. And when that moment comes, it is absolutely glorious. It's obviously the peak of the visual novel, but beyond that, I think it is one of the most powerful comebacks in any media I've ever experienced. Reawake plays at the start of that moment. This track brings back the motifs of Steins Gate's theme and gets you fucking pumped. It's truly an experience of its own right, and this moment, including the music, makes Steins Gate Zero absolutely worth it for me, even with all the plot issues I had with it. The Scrum Debate theme from Danganronpa V3 is different from every other theme on this list. It's a relatively basic electronic piece. It keeps the same melody and chord progression for almost the entire song and doesn't implement any advanced musical ideas or techniques. But sometimes simplicity is your best friend, and this track proves that. It begins with descending tension, just to build it back up again with a snare and two complementary synths, one of which continues to rise until the drop, which you aren't ready for because it's like a kick in the balls. The best way to describe this piece is never-ending tension. The main melody uses heavily reverberated stabbing chords that are extremely overpowering. As it progresses, the BGM continues to add elements to increase the tension until the next drop, dropping all tension just to build up to another drop with an epic melody comeback, incorporating more musical ideas such as snare rolls just to keep things intense. The theme is memorable enough, but the best part of this piece is how it's used. It only plays during one segment in Danganronpa V3's trials, and thus is only played several times throughout the entire 30-hour visual novel. The segments it is used for are the debate segments, where characters have a completely split opinion on one of the most important aspects of each case and have to discuss it, all while the Scrum debate theme is blasting in the background. The incredible tension and energy in the Scrum debate theme, mixed with it being used sparingly and in some of the most important parts in Danganronpa V3, is why this theme is incredibly memorable and certainly one of my favorite. Umineko has so many incredible songs that I just remember they're all incredible, so they blend into a blur as I play a playlist of its OST and jam out. However, Fishy Aroma sticks out to me as its most memorable soundtrack due to its first appearance coinciding with the beginning of Umineko's mystery, as the true start of the terrors that are about to occur on Rokenjima. Its main melody is mysterious. The bongos, as well as the xylophone-esque melody that continuously goes up and down, adds that witchiness feel to it, and in the middle and end of the tune, you get an energetic organ melody to add intensity. The combination of these elements really bring the first "oh shit" moment in Umineko. And whilst the scale of Umineko will certainly exponentially increase, including the grandness and epicness of the soundtracks, you shouldn't forget where it all started. Shinami from Hoshizora no Memoria immediately designates herself as one of the most annoying little sister characters of all time. Within the first hour of Hoshi Memo, she runs up to the protagonist multiple times, exclaiming "Oni-chan, Oni-chan, Oni-chan," usually followed by talking way too much about something that doesn't matter. The aptly named Chinamiism is a track that follows her. It's an upbeat song with a melody that exudes optimism and energy, which is fine on its own, but paired with the rambunctious Shinami and the amount of times it plays, you become conditioned to PTSD from the very beginning. This track is the best example of a memorable track attached to a character you don't necessarily have to like, and if you really want to hear me full send Shinami's catchphrase Oni-chan ×3, I actually appeared on the Vienture podcast talking about soundtracks and visual novels, and I yelled that shit like a champ. Check that out. Character themes can be essential in providing emotion to heroines, and Clannad and key visual novels in general are no exception to that. Kotomi is a heroine in Clannad you meet in the library, whom you very quickly discover is an oddball. She is very often alone, so is overjoyed to have met Tomoya by chance. One of the things she aspires to do is play the violin, though she is currently very bad at it. That's just the tip of the iceberg, but you can see how this theme, Etude pour les petites supercordes, can represent her character. As you read Kotomi's route and become connected to her character, you also create an emotional attachment to this BGM, which plays very often when she is on the screen. 4 years after reading Clannad, I decided to reread some of it, and once I came across Kotomi and this theme, it made me relive the emotions I felt whilst reading her route 4 years ago. It hurt, which is exactly why this theme has a place in my heart as one of my favorites and most memorable. Listening to Dreamin' Little Bird for the first time, I knew it was going to be a top 3 visual novel soundtrack for me. It is very gentle sounding and has a very nostalgic undertone, at least to me, and tells a sort of story as the melody progresses. For the first third of Dreamin' Little Bird, the melody is played with a woodwind instrument, gentle and relaxing sounding. In the middle, the melody is played with a string instrument and is the most pronounced part of the soundtrack. Lastly, it ends with a quiet choric sound and a gentle arpeggio. Despite a similar melody for the entire song, it has a different meaning in each part. I think it's absolutely a fantastic piece because it represents the atmosphere of If My Heart Had Wings beautifully, from looking up to a vast and open sky with dreams of flying in it, to finally achieving flight. I reveled every time I got to listen to this track whilst reading the visual novel, and it's the first thing I think of when I remember my time reading If My Heart Had Wings. Dreamin' Little Bird doesn't deserve my subpar descriptions, but it does deserve my and your praise. So go listen to it. Muv-Luv Alternative has so many emotionally intensive, memorable tracks, it's hard to pick just one. In the end, Destiny has to be my choice. When Destiny plays, it's at a pivotal point in the story where Takaru is discussing politics, morality, and nationalism. amongst other important topics, with a character you had very little interaction with in the story to that point. Yet, I find this to be one of the most important and interesting discussions in the entire visual novel, and is where Takeru finally changes his outlook on the situation at hand. I'm being very vague here because of spoilers, but people who've read Muv-Luv Alternative understand. This is absolutely my favorite moment in the entire Muv-Luv trilogy, and this soundtrack just amplifies it. I want to say it begins with themes of indecision and difficulty, and ends with acceptance, or put in another way, having to accept a destined fate. This track is beautiful, and I fucking love it. The Moon is Watching is my favorite soundtrack of all time. No, I'm serious. It's a relaxing, melancholic song that simultaneously embraces the calm and difficult parts of life. At the very least, I feel that is what it represents in the moments it plays in The Fruit of Grisaya. I specifically remember the times this soundtrack would play when Michiru was just looking out towards the ocean on her favorite hill, away from the school and all her friends, in a melancholic manner. And that feeling just really meshes with me. I'm obviously a bit biased due to Michiru being one of my favorite visual novel heroines ever, because this soundtrack isn't limited to those moments or Michiru specifically, but at least that's the thought for me that is carried with this song. It doesn't use complicated instruments, has a very simplistic and enjoyable melody, and it's short and to the point. This is a no bullshit BGM, and I believe its tone is a great representation of how a lot of characters in The Fruit of Grisaya are internally feeling. So yes, it's my favorite, which does in turn make it the most memorable, which is kind of cheating, but I mean, that's the nature of this video, so deal with it. And that's it. I'm sure you disagree with some of the inclusions on this list, but at the end of the day, these are just soundtracks that I found the most memorable in the visual novels I have read. I'd love to hear the soundtracks that you found the most memorable too, because there were also a lot of soundtracks that I wanted to include on this list that just didn't cut it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.